There we go. So today we are very excited to welcome Lindsey McCormick as our speaker. Lindsey has been working in healthcare for 8 years, primarily with older adults with neurodegenerative diseases. Lindsey is a passionate advocate for brain health. In February of 2021, Lindsey founded the Maryland Center for Brain Health, which uses a systemic, functional, and research-backed approach to address the root causes of cognitive dysfunction. The group aids clients in achieving optimal brain health and to prevent cognitive decline. It has been Lindsey's endeavor to educate and empower the population to let them know that they have control over their health and that the decline associated with aging is not inevitable. Lindsey is a certified dementia care practitioner, a licensed physical therapy assistant, and a certified memory coach. She also holds certifications in the Parkinson's Big and Loud program, as well as Dr. Lamb's Tai Chi for rehabilitation. Lindsey has spoken on numerous issues related to brain health and has appeared on international podcasts. She has numerous certifications in the field and is always looking for opportunities to improve her knowledge and skills. So through her experiences in education, she has one focus, and that's making people feel better and improving their health circumstances. And so she's very excited to bring her research-based protocol to the East Coast and teach people that a dementia diagnosis does not mean that all hope is lost. So with that, Lindsey, I'm going to give you the spotlight. I'm thrilled to have you with us and very excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you so much, Christina. I am just going to share my screen right now. So please let me know if you are able to see the presentation, Christina.
Yes, perfect, Lindsey.
Okay, give me 2 seconds and let me flip over into here. All right, still able to see it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just always takes a second to kind of get the Zoom set up. All right, so thank you all so much for having me today. I'm quite delighted to be here, and I really appreciate this opportunity to come and chat with you about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and that's caregiving, and especially caregiving for folks who have had any sort of dementia diagnosis. So I appreciate that really fantastic introduction, Christina. Oops, hit too far up my slide. Um, like she said, I'm a certified dementia practitioner, and I have worked with folks who have had neurodegenerative diseases for almost a decade now, and it is one of my favorite populations to work with and one of the most interesting populations. And I really enjoy helping people find new ways to navigate dementia care and to really connect with their loved ones or those that they are caring for. So I think that we all know, most of us know, that dementia is a vastly growing epidemic. Today there's about 55 million people worldwide living with dementia, and that is only expected to grow exponentially by 2030. They're expecting about 78 million people to be diagnosed with dementia. So even if you are not currently caring for somebody with dementia, the chances are high that you're going to have some sort of interaction with someone with dementia at some point in your life. And having the tools and resources to be able to properly interact with them and make those meaningful connections and interactions is going to be very, very powerful. So it's really crucial to learn how to interact with those diagnosed with dementia. So before I get into the Vital Five Pillars, which is what I'm really excited to talk about, I wanted to give a little bit of context regarding some of the ways that we interact with individuals living with dementia and how sometimes our subconscious and predisposed thoughts can lead to poorer interactions than I think a lot of us would like. So I want to tell you a little story about the grocery store. A friend of mine recanted this story to me, and it really got me thinking about our interactions with people and outward versus internal injuries and issues. So a friend of mine was at the grocery store one holiday season, and he was looking, I think, for drinks, like in the drink aisle, trying to find some beverages for a holiday party. And this friend of mine had been an executive director in assisted livings for a long time, memory cares. And if you've ever worked worked in an assisted living or, spent some time in them, you're most likely familiar with the sound of motorized wheelchairs. And most of us are familiar with that because we've probably been ran into on more than one occasion. So anytime we hear a motorized wheelchair coming, we kind of perk up and look around to see what's going on, who's coming down, are they coming after me? So he hears this motorized wheelchair coming around the corner. So he looks up, just kind of out of the corner of his eye to, see where they're at and, what they're doing. So he looks over and to his surprise, he sees that it's a gentleman who has no arms and no legs, and he's operating this motorized wheelchair through the use of his shoulder. He's kind of leaning into it and it's kind of helping him go, steering it forward and backwards. So this gentleman actually came up behind my friend Eric and he kind of said, "Hi, excuse me. I would really like to get that iced tea up there. Do you think that you could help me?" And Eric, of course, without even thinking, instinctually said, "Yeah, absolutely. Let me grab that tea for you. Here you go." Brief interaction, got him his tea, both kind of parted ways. And as Eric was telling me the story, he was realizing that this was just a very intuitive thing. He didn't have any conscious thought behind it. Somebody asked you for help. Yeah, absolutely. Let me help you. I can do that for you. And it was very even if Eric had seen him struggling, he probably went over and, would have asked him for help simply because he could see that he had these external difficulties, right? He's missing his arms, he's missing his legs. It's going to make it very hard for him to get the iced tea off the shelf. Now imagine you're a bystander and you're watching this interaction happen. And instead of helping the gentleman, what if Eric had said, I know it's really hard for you, but if you really try, I think that you can do it for yourself. You'd be a little flabbergasted, wouldn't you? Like you'd be like, wait a minute, did I just hear that? Did he just tell this gentleman with no arms to somehow figure out how to do it himself? You'd be kind of probably irritated and like, what is this jerk doing? The reason that you would probably have that response is because that gentleman had an outward deficit. You could clearly see he was missing his arms, he was missing his legs. So it was easy for you to have that reaction of outrage of how dare you tell him to just kind of get over it and just do it and just figure it out. And if he tries hard enough, he can make it happen. When people have outwardly visible deficits like missing limbs or they're on crutches or they're in a wheelchair, we often have people accommodating them all the time, but this is not often true for people that have internal disabilities, such as, a dementia diagnosis. And oftentimes we end up saying inappropriate things without even meaning to, but we don't always realize that they are harmful or inappropriate. So, why do we do this? I'm always really interested in the science behind what drives our interactions, what makes things happen, why do we do the things that we do? And we want to help people and we have these instinctual reactions because of things in our brain called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons were discovered in Australia and some researchers were researching with primates and they would put EEG leads on their brains and they were looking at how their brains would light up when interacting with different things and doing different activities, right? So pleasure, pain, sadness, happiness, different emotions and things like that. What they noted was at the end of one day, one of the researchers, after a shift, went over and picked up an ice cream cone and started licking it. What they noticed was that the EEGs, the leads on the primate's brain, lit up in the exact same areas that were lighting up on the researcher's brain. It was a very, very interesting discovery. And they learned that some brain cells fire when we do or see things being done. We have these mirror neurons that are going to mimic what's happening that we're seeing. And this is what gives us our empathy. This is what allows us to truly connect with people on a deeper and more meaningful level. It's the same thing as if we're, watching a TV show and some people have like a really hard time watching horror movies, if people are getting cut or hurt because we have these mirror neurons. When somebody gets cut on a TV show, we have that instinctual reaction of, oh my gosh, that same spot in our brain is lighting up. We feel it just like that person is feeling it. It only happens for a second and it doesn't last long, but it still happens. So when people are missing or have damaged body parts on the inside, some of the inappropriate things that we end up doing are saying things like, don't you remember? Certainly, most of us that have been dementia caregivers or worked in any sort of, dementia care setting have usually learned to take this phrase out of our vocabulary, right? We don't usually say, oh, don't you remember? But a lot of people don't understand this. And while we maybe have learned to say, don't you remember, we have not always learned not to imply, don't you remember? So you've probably seen this play out if maybe in your own family, or if you're caregiving for somebody, maybe you've seen this interaction happen with the person you're caring for's loved ones, or especially in an assisted living setting. When I was working as a physical therapist, I saw this all the time. You know, family member would come in the morning, go to see the resident, and they would say, to pick them up for a doctor's appointment. And the resident would not be ready. Maybe they're not out of bed, maybe they're out of bed, maybe they're not dressed. They're just not ready to walk out the door and go to this doctor's appointment. So family member says, Mom, we have to go to this appointment. Why aren't you ready? And the mom's like, I didn't know we had an appointment. And usually the kid's like, yes, you did. I called you last night. I told you to make sure that you're ready for this appointment this morning. The mom's like, I don't remember that. And they go and they get their calendar, like, look, Mom, I put it in your calendar for, 2 weeks ago. I said we have to go to this appointment. And the resident's like, I don't remember that. So I think a lot of us have probably heard conversations like this, or similar conversations like this with well-meaning family members. And even as professionals, we still make mistakes like this. And like I said, we don't outright say, don't you remember? We imply it. So I want you to pretend that I am giving you this presentation right now. And instead of through Zoom, you are sitting in a large auditorium. All right. And you are being very diligent about your hydration, because you know that it's really important to stay hydrated throughout the day. And so you're drinking a ton of water, right? What is naturally going to happen? You're going to get a signal from your bladder to your brain saying, we got to do something about this. Let's go. But let's say you're really enjoying this presentation. It's an amazing presentation. You're loving it. So you don't want to leave, right? So you're sitting there, you're like, I've got this. I'm just going to hold it, right? So you hold it, you hold it, you hold it, you hold it until your brain is like, no more. We got to go. Like, red alert. Let's get up. So you get up, quietly slip out of the auditorium, you go to the bathroom, quietly slip back in. So let's pretend that you're in the same scenario, only now when you stand up to go to the bathroom, I see you and I stop talking and I run over to you, and I freak out and I say, oh my goodness, it is not safe. You have to sit down. You have to sit down right now. Please, please, it's okay. Just sit down right now. And I try to push you down into the chair. Imagine how you're going to feel, right? You're going to get like a sudden rush of like a stress cortisol hormone response. You're going to be probably significantly freaked out. Worst case scenario, you might be so startled by what just happened that you relieve yourself and your bladder relieves itself and you have an accident because your bladder was already at critical load, and now you've got this huge startle and scare, and that can often happen. So another example, let's say that you're out to eat, right? You're sitting at a really nice restaurant, got the linen tablecloths and the napkins, and you're having just a great meal. Again, you get that urge to stand up. And all of a sudden, you stand up, go to the bathroom, and the server from across the room drops what they're doing and runs over to you and says, no, 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 no. Sit down, please. It's not safe. You really have to sit down. Again, you're probably going to freak out, right? But this is what is happening, you know, to caregivers and to loved ones and in assisted living homes every single day. So let's turn the tables a little bit. And now you're an 85-year-old. You have had multiple falls. You've got advanced Alzheimer's, and your family just moved you into this beautiful assisted living to keep you safe. And the staff feels that you're still a very high fall risk due to the numerous amounts of falls that you've already had. So they bring you into their beautiful dining room with their linen tablecloths and their lovely napkins for a lovely meal. And you sit down, and due to your shrinking hippocampus and your lack of short-term memory, you have no idea what is happening. Right? Maybe you do for about 3 seconds, maybe 5 seconds, maybe a little bit longer. But you're sitting there, all of a sudden you have no idea how long you've been sitting there. Maybe you recognize that you're in a restaurant or in a dining room, but you don't remember if you've even eaten, right? Maybe you think that your kids are little and it's still time to go pick them up from school, or any one of 1,000 things that can happen to people with dementia when they have short-term memory loss. So all of a sudden, you stand up because you don't know what you're doing there, right? You stand up, and a well-meaning staff member runs over from across the room and sees you, and their automatic response is, one of help, right? To save you. They don't want you to fall again. They don't want you to get hurt because, we all know that, that hip fracture could be someone's last. So they just have your best interest at heart, and they just come and grab you and they sit you down and they say, no, you can't stand up. It's not safe. There's really no difference in this reaction to somebody that is 45 sitting in a restaurant, cognitively intact versus somebody that's 85 and sitting in a dining room. The feeling is exactly the same. It's scary and it's jarring and it's disturbing, and you don't always understand or know what is happening or what is going to happen next. So, what do we do about this? We have to create the illusion of control. We as humans cannot possibly see every possible detail of everything that is around us. So what do? We cognitively chunk things and we block a lot of stuff out. And this really gets exacerbated when people have a dementia diagnosis. So if any of you remember the show, The Truman Show, there's a movie that came out. I don't even remember when. It makes me feel old to think about how long ago I think this movie came out. But it was a very interesting concept because it was a gentleman who was basically in his own reality show, and he was born there and grew up there with the whole world watching, and he had no idea. So he was just living his life as if he would live his life, thinking that he had control over his life and what was going on in it. But the reality was everything else on the outside of the soundstage, all the producers, everybody else had control over his life except for him. So good dementia care has to kind of be like the Truman Show, right? Our people that we are caring for have to be Truman, and we have to help them feel safe and feel like they are the ones in control instead of us. So, how do we create that illusion of control with an 85-year-old who's got a history of falls and advanced Alzheimer's? So, picture this: you're back in that restaurant, you stand up. All of a sudden, somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, Jessica." They put their arm around you to give you kind of a side hug and say, "Oh my goodness, it is so good to see you. How have you been?" So, most people, if they don't know who this person is, and I think this has happened to probably all of us, right? You've met somebody out and they're like, "Hi, how's it going? It's been so long." And you're like, "I don't know who you are." Happened to me multiple times. It happens to a lot of people. They're giving you social clues that they know you though, right? They might have, "How's your husband doing? Is he still, working for the newspaper? How's that going?" They give you these social clues that they know you. They're physical with you. They're giving you a hug. They're giving you an interaction. Most people kind of go with it and run with it and maybe try to figure out their name later on. So same thing happens with somebody that's 85 with Alzheimer's in a dining room, right? So if somebody comes over to you, even if it's quickly, if they've got a big smile on their face and they give you social clues as to what they know about you and they put your arm around you in a sideways hug, it has a very different feeling than if somebody is just rushing over to you, freaking out and trying to push you back down, right? They're creating that illusion of control. The resident or the person that you're caring for thinks that they're in control, but in reality, you're steering the ship. You're coming over to them, you're calming them, right? You're being a very calming presence. You're giving them social cues, that familiarity, you're establishing trust. You give them that sideways hug because you're concerned about them falling. So they don't realize that you're holding on to them to keep them from falling or to keep them from having another accident. So it's all about helping them to feel like they're in control without creating that sense of fear or disturbance. And there is definitely a fine line and a difference between being somebody that is manipulative and unethical and using wise interpersonal techniques to sort of help establish that trust and help people make decisions that would be wise for them. So I'm talking a bit about this on this slide because it's quite a large issue, and I have seen issues like this and many others play out in different in homes with caregivers and in assisted living communities. So it's something that happens almost on a daily basis and constantly. So as I get into the vital five pillars and we start talking about that, I'm going to discuss further aspects of this principle and how we can really improve our interactions and interventions with individuals who have dementia. So what are the vital five pillars? So the vital five pillars stand for validating their emotional experience, improvise and be in the moment, terminate the task trap, accommodate their sensory deficits, and life history is our most important tool. So as I mentioned earlier, at some point in our lives, we are all going to interact with somebody with dementia, and it is important to understand how to best approach them and learn how to connect with them on their level. So let's talk about validating their emotional experience. Feelings are a physical fact that they are biochemical, neurochemistry, complex reactions that happen in our body, and they are very, very real. They're an experience that we have and that somebody else has. And when we try to talk somebody out of feeling what they are feeling, it's just the same as if trying to tell somebody that has a, full leg cast on to just take it off. It's all in your head. You can just walk, you can be fine. You have to remember that folks that have mid to late stage dementia and Alzheimer's are literally missing a part of their body. They're missing the part of their brain that is allowing them to regulate their emotions. Our emotions really get filtered through our beliefs, our attitudes, our values, our experiences, and our prior knowledge. Whatever we are experiencing is reality, and whatever they are experiencing is reality. Whether it doesn't match our reality, it is still their reality. And we need to have space to allow other people to feel what they are feeling. So trying to tell somebody not to feel something when they're already feeling it is quite ineffective. So I want to tell you a little story about a lady that I had an interaction with a couple of years ago when I was working as a physical therapist assistant in an assisted living in a memory care community. So this is a story about Caroline. So Caroline, unfortunately, had the dementia trifecta. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, and dementia with Lewy bodies. So this poor lady was having severe, severe visual and auditory hallucinations by the time that her dementia had, severely progressed. So what would happen with Caroline is she would be walking down the hallway, perfectly fine, happy and smiling, and all of a sudden she would start looking around and she would start screaming, "Get off of me! Stop! What are you doing?" And just like inconsolable, just yelling. So what the staff learned and what we eventually learned was that she was hallucinating, that people were coming up and harassing her and attacking her and just being just really awful to her, and she couldn't fight them off and she couldn't get away from them. It started out as one person in her head, but eventually it grew to be like a crowd of people that were just coming at her and attacking her, and she couldn't get away. So of course she was freaking out and scared, and couldn't get away and didn't know what to do. And it's really scary if you are working in an assisted living and you see this happen, right? You're observing this poor lady just, going crazy and screaming and yelling, and it's scary to you. So you, as a well-meaning staff member, know that you need to stay calm because you can't get upset at her. You can't match her level, right? So you go over there, you try to talk to her, you try to calm her down. You say, "I know this seems unpleasant. Let's go for a walk." Or, "It's okay, Caroline. Let's calm down. There's nothing there." What's Caroline going to do? She's going to keep flailing. She's going to keep screaming. She's probably going to smack you, right? So it's very unsettling when you think that you're in the fight of your life and people are attacking you, for someone to kind of come up and kind of tiptoe around you and be like, "It's okay. Let's go over here. How does that sound?" You're not going to understand why that's happening. So when I was working with this lady for physical therapy, and she started having one of her attacks, so I decided to help her. I decided to join the fight with her, right? So she started, yelling and screaming at people. And so I asked her, I said, "Where are they? Where are they doing? Let's fight them off. Let's get them, Caroline. We're gonna get these people away and we're gonna shoot. Get out of here. We don't want you around." And she started to calm down. She felt like somebody was on her side. She felt like somebody was in the fight with her. And it only lasted a few minutes, but being in that fight with her and talking with her and helping her and showing her that I was on her side helped her brain do what it should have done in the first place, dropped her cortisol level and released the endorphins to help her be able to calm down. So then, of course, what do you do in a situation like that? You try to utilize humor, right? You try to dissolve the situation. So I said, "Come on, Caroline, let's go." And we kind of skipped away down the hall, and she was kind of laughing and giggling. And, we got to the end of the hallway, and she put her hand on my arm and she said, "I'm so glad you're here." And so I put my arm around her and I said, "It's all right. Let's get out of here. Let's go. Let's go." And we went for a walk, and she calmed down and she came out of it. Now, this would not be the last time that this would happen. This would happen, quite frequently, actually. And it's very time consuming, to have an interaction like this, right? I was able to do that because I was working with her, and, it kind of became part of our session. And I was able to help her in that way. But when you're, a caregiver in an assisted living like that, you don't always have time, every 30 minutes when she's having these hallucinations, to kind of get in the fight with her. So what happened with her was, we eventually contacted her doctor and she was able to get on, some low dose antipsychotic medication, which she truly needed for her hallucinations. And I'm going to talk a bit, throughout this, program about, why a lot of people usually end up on antipsychotics. But in this instance, it was truly warranted to kind of get her on that low dose to reduce that severity of her hallucinations, which were able to reduce the frequency and intensity. But that, caregiver interaction was really important, and kind of getting in the fight with her and getting in on her level was really important. I just witnessed something a couple of days last week actually. I was working in another assisted living and memory care, and I was on my way out and I just kind of observed this interaction between one of the caregivers and one of the residents there. And I think, as a lot of us have seen when we're caring with people with mid to late stage dementia, people can get very emotional. They can get weepy, they can get upset for absolutely no reason. There's probably a reason. We just have to take the time to figure out what that reason is, and sometimes it can be really hard, but sometimes they get very weepy. And I just observed from a distance, this caregiver was kind of berating this lady a little bit. She was like, "Why are you crying? I don't understand why you're crying. Like, you have nothing to be upset about. You're here in this great community. I don't get why you're crying." And it was very disturbing to me to sort of watch this interaction. And it really highlighted to me the fact that caregivers really need so much more education, especially in assisted livings where people are dealing with, they're in these memory care units and they're dealing with multiple people that have different varying forms of dementia in different stages all day long. And to really be able to get on somebody's level and kind of understand and empathize with them, and try and figure out what's going on, is definitely a skill, and it's definitely, something that kind of needs to be, learned and trained. So there's a lot of different interactions that people have, and it's so important to not dismiss their emotional experiences, to not dismiss what is happening to them. Pain is another one. I saw this a lot when I was working in physical therapy, that it's very, very difficult for folks who have dementia to let you know that they're in pain. And pain is an emotional experience, right? When we're in pain, think about the last time you were in severe pain. How did you feel? How did you interact with people? Were you kind and friendly and pleasant? Or were you maybe a little grumpy? So, people that are unable to express the amount of pain that they're in, it can often be expressed in aggression. And this is the type of thing that really needs to be figured out and should not be treated with antipsychotics, right? Because if somebody's in pain and we just put them on antipsychotics, they're just going to continue to be in pain, and we're never going to be able to help them. And we're just probably going to have to keep upping their antipsychotics because their pain is probably just going to get worse. Also, folks that are pre-terminal can often have pre-terminal agitation, that can sometimes cause extreme aggression, and or restlessness. So it's always important to kind of be on the lookout for that as well. So the next aspect of our Vital Five Pillars is to improvise and to be in the moment. So William Shakespeare said, "All the world is a stage." And if you've ever taken an acting class, you will know that the first rule of improvisation is to never say no. And just like we don't want to say, "Do you remember?" We don't want to imply, "Do you remember?" We also don't want to imply no as well. So if we were limited to living in the moment, like a lot of people with a dementia diagnosis are, living in the moment or living in the distant past, life becomes an exercise in improvisation. So it's so important to never say no and avoid implying no. It's important to speak to the emotion behind the message. It's really important not to give more information than they're capable of processing. And the invitation should focus on what is happening now, not what is happening in the future. So let me tell you a little story about Margaret. So Margaret's was a lovely, lovely lady who would have a tendency when she was eating her meals to not finish them. So she was very, very thin, very undernourished because she wasn't eating enough food. She was losing a lot of weight. She desperately, desperately needed to finish her meals, and she needed this nutrition. So a friend of mine was working in an assisted living where this took place, and he witnessed her get up from the dining room, grab a carrot, and go sit in the sort of living room community area in the memory care. And she took the carrot and she took a pillow and she started making this motion with it, right? So what was she doing? She was sewing. Margaret used to be a really fantastic seamstress for all of her life. So she was just sitting there with her carrot, just sewing this pillowcase onto this pillow, making sewing motions. And so in a situation like this, well-meaning caregivers are usually going to go over to Margaret and say, "Hey, Margaret, what are you doing? Let's not do that. Let's take this carrot. Can we go back to the dining room and finish your meal? We really need to get you to eat," right? This is another way of implying, don't you remember? Don't you remember that you were just eating in the dining room and we need to go back there. You have to finish your food, right? You haven't been eating enough lately, so let's go back there. So instead of falling into the task trap, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and failing to improvise and be in the moment, what my friend did was he sat down with Margaret and he chatted with her about sewing and the carrot. And he mentioned to her what a good seamstress she was. And he just watched her sew. And as she sewed, she, did one line and then she did another line and she kept sewing until finally she got to the top end part of the pillowcase. So when she finished, she sat down the pillowcase and she set down the carrot. And my friend complimented her on her sewing and offered her to go for a walk. And she was agreeable. She's like, "Sure, I finished my sewing. Let's go for a walk." Took her for a little walk around, ended up walking her by the dining room, saw the table that she had been sitting at with her table mate there. Walked her over to the table to her table mate, acted like her table mate was long lost friend. "Oh my goodness, Bethany, how are you? It's so good to see you. Do you know my friend Margaret? Margaret, this is Bethany." And sat Margaret down. Margaret was delighted to see Bethany. Bethany was delighted to see Margaret. He said, "You know, Bethany's eating. Margaret, would you like some food?" Margaret was like, "Yeah, I'd like to eat." So what he went and did, he got the rest of her food and brought it to her, and she ate the rest of it. Right? She finished up her meal, sat for a little bit, she got bored, went back up, wandered around a little bit more. But what he didn't do was say, when he brought the food, he didn't say, "Hey, Margaret, here's the rest of your meal. You didn't finish this earlier, so let's see if you can finish it now." He acted like she had never been eating in the first place. Her good friend Bethany was eating. Did she want to come sit down and eat with Bethany? Sure, why not? Let's do that. So it's just another example of you have to be flexible and almost play a character and get in the moment and really be able to improvise in order to give that illusion that somebody else is in control. So what kind of play do you want to be a part of with the people that you are caregiving, right? If any of the people that you're caregiving for have ever had cognitive testing done, it's a great way to figure out what a person's current memory capabilities are, how long they're able to remember and store information and process it, and it can really improve your interactions with them. So just remember, never give people more than they can remember at a time, right? Little chunks. We don't want to say, "All right, Margaret, we are gonna, go to the spa. We're gonna get you a bath, and it's just gonna be this wonderful experience. And doesn't the water feel good? I always love it when I have a bath." And right, we want small sentences. "Margaret, it's bath time." We don't want to give them more information than they can process in one time. We need to make that connection with them, right? My friend knew that Margaret was a seamstress. "Margaret, tell me about your sewing. This is beautiful. I love the stitching that you did." And the invitation to do something should focus on the next step rather than the whole process, right? You just want to tell them, here's what we're doing next, not the next 12 steps down the line. So improvise and be in the moment. T stands for terminate the task trap. And this, I think, is one of the most important pillars. And I think it is the one that we often default to. We are so busy in our lives, right? Everything that we're doing, especially when we're caring for someone, right? There's so much to do, it seems like, especially if you're in an assisted living, right? There's just a million things to take care of. There's a million residents to deal with. And often we get really focused on what is happening. So the task trap is what happens when we are too busy being routine focused, avoiding interpersonal responsibility, and putting tasks ahead of people. If you go straight to the task, you're with somebody who has been diagnosed with dementia, you're probably going to fail the majority of the time. So let me put this into a little bit of context for you. Let's say that you are caring for somebody who has very, very short-term memory, right? They don't remember more than, maybe a minute, maybe two. So the family moves them into an assisted living community or, gets them a caregiver at home. Now pretend that this person is you, right? You are the person with the short-term memory. Now, because you have dementia, you're not processing language as well as you should. And when they say, let's get you ready for bed, all you hear is, let's get you, right? You're not hearing the full sentence. That would be kind of a scary experience, right? Because somebody's talking to you, you're not really hearing what they're saying. So then, let's say that this person just kind of comes into your room and starts flipping on the light, starts rummaging through your stuff. You have no idea what is happening. They go into your drawers, they open them up, they start pulling things out, they head over to you, you're sitting on the edge of the bed, and they say, let's get you changed, and they start taking off your clothes. You have no idea what is going on. You would be absolutely terrified, right? If that happened to you in your own home, that would be a terrifying thing. If somebody came into your house and just started rummaging through things and started trying to undress you and changing your clothes, it's the same thing that happens to somebody with short-term memory loss with dementia. That person is scared. They don't understand what is happening. And then what happens? They lash out. They get aggressive. They, might strike out. They might have behaviors. So then they start to get labeled as somebody with behavioral issues, somebody who's resistant to care, and then usually get put on antipsychotic medications that they don't need because somebody failed to terminate the task trap. They went straight to the task ahead. The task was, I got to get this person up. I've got to get them out of bed. I got to get them dressed. Just go straight to the drawer, start getting the stuff, go over to their bed, start trying to change them. You have to establish a connection. So what if instead somebody came into your room, walked up to you, said your name, right? Acted like they'd known you forever, started giving you some social clues, right? So let's say somebody came in and said, hi, Lindsay, I'm Jennifer. I'm your helper today, and I hear that you like cats. Oh, I see that you have a picture of a cat over here. Is that your cat? Does your cat ever sleep with you on your bed when you go to bed at night? Well, it's time to go to bed now, so I'm going to help you with that. Do you mind if I go over to your drawer and get you some pajamas? Is that okay? That interaction is going to go over considerably better than somebody that is just very task oriented and going straight to the task. And it's so understandable that this happens all the time because, like I said, I know we are busy. We're busy, busy people. If you're in an assisted living community, you may have 7 people that you have got to get up and get ready in time for, breakfast by 9 a.m. And they all require varying degrees of assistance. So you've just got to go, 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 go. But you're going to have a much better time. You're going to have a much easier time. And the person that you're caring for is going to cooperate with you and be less aggressive and have less behaviors if you can find a connection with them, right? You have to remember that people who have short-term memory issues, their memory is kind of like an onion, right? And as they progress through the stages of dementia, that onion layer starts to peel back and it peels back. And each new layer of that onion represents their current reality. So both short-term and long-term memory get affected with dementia. And as the onion gets peeled away, you have to remember the way that our brain forms memories, right? So when we're really young, we're babies, our brains form memories from the back of our brain up into the frontal lobe. And if somebody has dementia and they progress through the stages of dementia, they start to lose their memories, the latest memories that they formed from the front of their brain all the way to the earliest memories in the back of their brain. So that's why they remember, a lot of stuff that happened earlier on in their life. And most people, regress back into experiences and remember things that happened from the time that they were 15 to about 30 years old. And the reason for this is because there are so many things that happen to us during that time period that get imprinted in our brain. There are so many firsts that happen, right? 18th birthday, driver's license, your first drink, maybe your first kiss, first jobs, first marriage, kids. There's so many things that happen between these couple of decades that really imprint on us, right? Our brains don't really, care to remember, what did you have for breakfast in 1995? But it definitely wants to remember what was your wedding date in 2012, right? Your brain knows that if you don't remember that, that's going to be an issue, further down the line. So it really knows the important things to remember. And these are the things that really get imprinted at us and that people regress back to as they go through the stages of dementia. So the complication with this, again, is let's say this person only has, memory for, short-term memory for a couple of minutes. You've come in, you've started getting them ready for the day. Oh, you remember that you forgot something important that they needed. So you have to go back out of the room to go get it. You're gone maybe 3 minutes. You come back. This person has now forgotten that you were there. They have forgotten that interaction. You have to start over. You have to reestablish that connection. You can't just go straight to the task. Let's say you were about to get them to go brush your teeth. You can't just walk into the room and say, hey, let's go to the bathroom, let's brush your teeth. They're going to be like, who are you? What? Why are you telling me what to do? You have to reestablish that connection again. And again, I know that this is time consuming, but it is considerably going to improve your interactions with the people that you're caring for if you can terminate the task trap and not just go straight to whatever it is that you felt that you needed to be doing and take the time to really make that connection with them. So, a little story about Susan. So Susan, and this is a real story, but Susan can pretty much be any resident because I think everybody has had a resident like this, or maybe cared for somebody like this, or maybe even their own loved one is experiencing these type of symptoms where they don't quite remember where they're at. So Susan was a resident of an assisted living community, and what would happen with Susan, she would get agitated at the same time every day, right? And it was usually about the time that her husband would come home and, she would make dinner and he'd get home from work. So the same time every day, she's in this assisted living and she realized that she wasn't home. And she knew that her husband was supposed to be coming home, even though her husband had died several years prior. So she's at the same time every day saying, I want to go back home. I need to go back home. My husband's going to be coming home. I really have to get back home. I think we've all had that person in our life that just wants to go back home, in that assisted living setting. So what happened with Susan was she thought that she was living in a hotel, right? These assisted living communities are beautiful now. So she really thought that she was in a hotel. So she thought she's staying in this hotel. She has to go back home because her husband's going to be home and she really needs to get dinner started. All that the staff needed was for Susan to want to stay one more night, right? All they needed to do was convince her to stay another night. Um, you know, what happens though is a lot of well-meaning caregivers try to focus a little bit too much on making the Susans of the world feel safe and feel like this is their home when all they really need to do is convince her to stay another night, right? So they might go up to her and say, Susan, this is your home, right? You live, do you want me to take you to your room? You live here now. Let's go. And that's not really going to help Susan because in her reality, right? Remember her feelings. We have to validate her feelings and her reality at this moment. Her reality is that she's in a hotel and her husband is going to be home. So what do we have to do? We have to terminate the task trap, right? The task is, oh, we have to get Susan to realize she's here and to not want to go home. So if we push that aside and we can use some of those social cues and that connection that we've, learned in some of these, previous strategies, that's how we're going to, learn from them and learn to connect with them. So oftentimes the people we're caring for are going to repeat themselves over and over and over again. And those can often seem irritating, but if you really take the time to listen to what they're saying, those are going to be the clues that you can use to interact with them. So they might repeat things over and over and over again. What Susan repeated was that she wanted to go home to her house on Lubkin Street. She knew that she lived on Lubkin Street and that is what she wanted to go home to. And she knew that her husband was going to be there. So you can use those cues. So, you can go up to Susan and say, hey, Susan, hi, my name's Karen. And, do you still live at that house on Lubkin Street? And Susan's going to be like, that's going to be a connection. It's going to make her think, I think I know this person. So Susan, I am so sorry. I completely forgot to tell you. Your husband called me and he said that he is not going to be able to come home tonight because he is still on his sales route. Susan's husband used to be a salesman and he was often gone on sales jobs all over the country. And she knew this. So, what this staff member did by talking to Susan this way was took the blame, right? Susan was like, I want to go home. I want to go home. The staff member made it their problem, not her problem. So they took the blame and said, oh my goodness, it is completely my fault. I totally forgot to tell you your husband called. And of course, so then Susan's listening. She's like, oh, it's your fault. Oh, okay, okay. And she's already feeling better because she knows that it wasn't her fault, right? So she made that meaningful connection with Susan. Um, she acted like she was her long lost friend. She gave her those social cues, that friendly approach, made her trust her. And she used an emotional hook. She said, I'm sorry, is my fault. She blamed herself and she took the burden for Susan. And then she told Susan what was true in her world. Susan knew she needed to go home. And in Susan's world, what was true was that her husband was still alive. So I think a lot of people in dementia care have learned you never tell somebody whose loved one has passed away that their loved one has passed away because all it does is re traumatize them and can usually just lead to arguments. So instead, you meet her where she is at. Susan believed her husband was still alive. So in her reality, her husband was still alive. So the staff member took the blame, said, I'm so sorry. Your husband got called. He's tied up in his sales route. He'll be home tomorrow. Why don't you stay another night? So Susan acquiesced and went along her merry way. So, step one in any meaningful interaction is to build that personal connection, to build trust, and to establish a relationship that will allow them to give you the opportunity to assist them in that task. So, never go straight to the task. Always take time to connect with the person and to see the person for who they are. So, the next step in our Vital Five Pillars is to accommodate sensory deficits. Visual and language processing problems that cause most of the trouble that we have when we're caring for people who have, cognitive disabilities. One of the earliest symptoms that shows up when people are diagnosed with early detection of Alzheimer's is a loss of a sense of smell. Our olfactory senses are directly related or connected to our hippocampus. Science is still trying to figure out how and why that is. You're definitely starting to notice it with COVID and long COVID symptoms. We lose that sense of smell, and long COVID, we have all that brain fog and we can't remember things. There's a big connection there that we're still trying to figure out. So people that have dementia and Alzheimer's disease often experience decreased visual, hearing, and language and processing issues, right? Loss of smell is a big one, but it's not nearly as impactful as when people are not able to see and they have difficulty processing languages. So, as a caregiver, you have to learn to say a lot more with your words, with a lot less with your words, and a lot more with your behavior. So let's talk a little bit about what happens to people as their dementia progresses and what happens with some of these visual changes. So somebody with visual changes due to dementia usually end up with narrow peripheral vision, right? If you kind of put your hands up by your eyes and you try to look side to side or you try to turn your head, you're going to have kind of that narrow peripheral vision that someone with dementia might have. Their depth perception is going to be diminished, right? So they're not going to be able to tell how far away an object is. Their ability to process movement fluidly is going to be impaired, right? So it's going to, like, if you blink really quickly several times, and that's kind of what it looks like to somebody with dementia, right? It almost feels like things are really jerky and coming at you and not moving as fluid as they should. They have difficulty processing different colors. So things that are the same color, they're not usually able to differentiate between. The lens of the eye starts to lose its elasticity and it starts to yellow with age, and the pupils become less reactive to light. So let's think about this in the context of somebody with dementia. So imagine that you are driving along a road at night, right? You're driving down the highway, and all of a sudden, you come across an intersection and you go to pull on the intersection, and a car just comes and just narrowly misses you, just almost sideswipes you, but you stop in time and they go past you, right? What is going to happen in that moment? Right, you're going to be like this, right? That cortisol response is going to jump up. Your heart's going to have palpitations. You're going to have this like really strong brain chemistry that's happening, this stress response that happens. And that brain chemistry can linger from, some people that have experiences like that, it goes away in a couple seconds. Some people, it could last with them all day. So the same thing happens to people that have visual and processing disorders with dementia. So for instance, how many of you have ever been walking down the hallway and you see the person that you're caring for, or you see a resident of the memory care community that you're in, and you're on your way to a meeting, right? You got that task trap going and you're just walking and you tap them on the back of the shoulder and you say, "Hey, good morning, Bob," and you're gone. You're off like a lightning, right? Bob has visual changes, so he does not hardly see you going by him, and he's got processing delays. So when you tap him on the back, it takes him a minute to realize that somebody even tapped him on the back, and you are long gone. So by the time Bob realizes that, he looks over his shoulder to see who's tapping him on the back, and there's nobody there. That's a really scary thought, right? Like if, I mean, we're getting into the spooky season, right? Like something taps you on the back and you turn and look over your shoulder and there's nothing there. It's going to be really disconcerting, right? Or, you might even get a little bit angry, like, I know I felt something. I know I felt something there. Like, what is happening? So then let's say you feel that and you walk around the corner to where there's maybe a group of another residents and you see a big tall man with a very flat affect, as often happens in people with dementia and Parkinson's, right? You just see this very large man and he's just kind of staring at you. Your brain is trying to put two and two together, so you might see that man and say, "It was you tapped me on the shoulder." And then the gentleman's going to be like, "No, I didn't." And then what might happen? An argument's probably going to ensue. Next thing you know, you've got two residents kind of going at it and they're arguing at each other and possibly being aggressive with each other. So, and all that happened was somebody, tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Hi, good morning," "Hi, good morning." So these little interactions that we have with people, we don't necessarily realize how it's affecting them, until after it happens. And that the same thing happens with approaching people, right? So I'm actually going to pull my camera down here just a little bit so you can see. So let's say that you are, sitting down and you have dementia and you're sitting down in an community or your house, and your caregiver is coming up to you. So if I stand up, if I have visual processing disorders and I can't see a lot and my peripheral vision is, much less, and I'm having trouble seeing things fluidly. If somebody's standing up and they're coming at you, right? Like usually this is all that you're going to see, right? Somebody's coming at you and this is it. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to put your hands on your eyes like this, and I want you to blink really, really quickly. Okay. While I stand up, I want you to blink really, really quickly. And then I'm going to come at you. Let's say you've got, you spilled something on you and I just want to help you, get that off. And I'm kind of coming at you and I'm not coming out. And this is all that you see, right? And you're blinking and you just see someone coming at you like this. That's going to be a really scary interaction. And sometimes what happens when that happens is people get aggressive and they get combative and they're like, "No," and they swat you away. That's because what they're seeing is terrifying to them in their reality in that moment. So what needs to happen is we have to get down on their level. We have to approach them from the front so that they can see us coming, so that they can have time to process that we're coming at them, so that they don't sense it as attack and don't strike out and lash out. And again, get labeled as combative or aggressive. So you can see how in a lot of these interactions that we have with people, with these vital five pillars, it is so easy for the people that we're caring for to be scared and frightened and fearful and to lash out and be labeled as aggressive or problematic or with behavioral issues and get, doped up on antipsychotic medications. So that's why it's so important to really take the time to get to know them and to understand them and to know how to interact with them, because I think that it can really help with, kind of the overprescribing that's happening with, a lot of these antipsychotic medications for people that don't actually need them. We just need to know how to better interact with them. So I want you all to look at this picture And if you want to post in the chat, you can if you know what is wrong with this picture. So if you look at this picture, it is white. Everything is the same color. So I see this a lot in a lot of the assisted livings that I'm in, is they have white tile on the floor, they've got white walls, white toilets, white showers, white shower benches. This is an extreme problem for somebody that has, visual processing issues because they're not able to differentiate. So we get a lot of falls that happen in the bathroom because somebody's trying to get in the shower and they misjudge where the shower is, or they misjudge where the shower bench is, or they, don't really see the toilet because it's blending in with the floor. So having these different colors in the bathroom can really, really be incredibly beneficial to helping them. Can you spot the problem on this plate? Somebody's trying to eat and all of their food is the same color and it's on a plate that is the same color. They're going to have a really hard time differentiating between the different foods, where the foods are, and how to eat the foods. And last but not least, this one as well. What is going to be the issue here? Right? Everything's the same color again. So this is going to end up with somebody on the floor because they misjudge where the couch seat is because it looks just like the floor. So when we're accommodating people with vision problems, and we want to remember to approach them from the front, use contrasting colors, move a little slower than you normally would, tell the affected person what you're going to do before you begin, avoid abrupt transitions in flooring or shiny floors, and narrow hallways, if somebody's in a really narrow hallway, can also provoke aggressive behaviors. So we want to, if you find that that's happening, try and get them out into a wider area. We also have to take more time when people have language changes, right? We have to give them time to process, and nonverbal languages count, right? Like that slap on the back, that is definitely, hi, good morning, is definitely a nonverbal type of thing. So what we do with language changes, people's vocabulary diminishes. They lose the ability to process by about 50% of the language they hear. They lose the ability to attach meaning to non-language sounds. They often process rhythm and pitch better than words, and they cannot filter noise and distractions as easily because many more sounds are like gibberish. And this is something to think about in your own home if you're caring for somebody, or in an assisted living dining room. How loud is the space, right? Because when there's all of this auditory noise, it can really make language processing difficult, and it can make the language in their own head difficult to process. So it's really easy for people to get overstimulated. So when we're trying to accommodate speech and language changes, we want to use simple words, right? We know that their words might be misused. Their vocabulary is going to shrink. They're going to lose that rhythm, and that nonverbal communication becomes incredibly important. And we want to use all the right nonverbal communication to show that we're engaged. And the last thing we want to talk about is life history. This is our most important tool, I think, because if somebody is living in the past, how can we interpret the context we are in if we don't know their life history? And I know that I'm going over time, so I'm just going to go through this really quickly, but life history gives us two things. It allows us to see how the person interprets the context that they're in, and it allows us to understand their identity and how they see themselves. If we interact with somebody in a way that doesn't match how they see themselves, it's not going to go as smoothly as we would like. So Barbara was a resident, my same friend who used to be an executive director in an assisted living had a resident named Barbara who, for the first 6 months she lived in the community, was a perfect resident. Everything went great. All of a sudden, Barbara stopped wanting to take a bath and to take a shower. She just absolutely flat out refused. The staff was bewildered. They had no idea what was going on. He couldn't figure out what was going on. So she just kept saying, oh, I'll do it tonight, I'll do it in the morning, and just, flat out refusing. So they tried all these different tactics, spa days, different things that would work for a little while and then stop working as her dementia progressed and her memory regressed further and further and further. So he started asking around, trying to find common denominators between all the different staff that were trying to bathe her and care for her and give her different baths and showers. And the one thing that he noticed in common with all of them was she would freak out as soon as the running water started. So running water would start, she'd be naked, up, screaming, running around, fly out the door, running through the community, right? It absolutely terrified her. So he went and talked to the daughter and asked her, can you give me some information about your mom? What is going on? What is happening in this context? Like, we can't figure out why she's afraid of the running water. So the daughter told them, "Oh, I probably should have told you this before, but mom grew up during the Great Depression. She grew up in a very, very small town, very, very poor. They never had running water till she was over 18 years old. She never saw running water. So as her memory had progressed deeper and deeper and deeper, she no longer had a memory of running water, and she was absolutely terrified of it. If you have never seen running water in your life and you're used to like pouring it from the sink or pumping it from the well, that is going to be a really terrifying experience for you. So she, you know, they started approaching things differently. They started giving her sponge baths. They never had another problem with her. So that is why life history is so incredibly important. We have to know what happened in somebody's past in order to properly care for them in the current present. So just a real quick recap. We want to validate their emotional experience, improvise and be in the moment, terminate the task trap, accommodate sensory deficits, and life history is our most important tool. So if we have time for questions, I don't know if we do. I apologize for going over a few minutes. But
Lindsey,
if
that
anybody,
was a wonderful presentation with so much practical, useful information that I know every single one of us can take away today, and use something that you told us that will absolutely make a difference in our interactions with somebody with dementia. Folks, I'm going to go through. There's a couple of questions. We'll do those. If you're able to stay on the call and interested, we welcome you to do that. We promise not to keep too long. But Lindsey, someone asked, what is the best approach with someone who is in denial that they are experiencing memory issues?
that is such a good question. And
And
it is one
actually,
of,
let me here as we talk about
yeah.
understanding the past as it relates to the present. So to put that into context, the person has an experience. They did work in home health and hospice care, so they really get defensive now about being the patient. Any suggestions?
Okay, so the patient
The
used to work
patient,
in,
yeah.
okay. Those are the toughest people to kind of interact and care for, and that is the toughest point, I think, in the dementia disease, right? Is that in between stage where people know they know what is wrong with them, or they know that something is wrong with them, but they're really in denial about it, and they don't want to admit that something's happening. And honestly, the people that have been in healthcare make the worst patients. I can attest to this with my father, who is a doctor who, is currently had like a quintuple bypass and uncontrolled diabetes. And, they really, it's so hard to talk to them because sometimes they think that they know best. So you often have to not approach it as, hey, mom, there's something wrong with you, or I think that you can't go at it in any sort of accusatory manner, right? You kind of have to make it seem like it's their idea or even your idea, right? So you could say, hey, um, do you ever have any concerns about, getting older or cognitive decline? I know I do. And you could maybe talk to them about some of your concerns, and you could say, hey, I've really been thinking about, maybe getting some cognitive testing done for myself. Would you want to come with me? Would you be interested in that? Would you, do you have any interest in that? So kind of try and either make it some sort of activity where they don't feel like it's them, right? They're not the one at fault. They are not the one that's broken, or they have the thing that's wrong with them, right? Try and make it seem, if you can get them to get an outside opinion, because, people don't love to listen to family, right? Or even friends. Sometimes they need a professional opinion, or they just need somebody outside, or sometimes they just need objective measurements. So, right, like getting cognitive assessments could be really important, because then they could have an objective measurement that's not just somebody saying, hey, I think you have dementia, or even just a neurologist saying, I think you've got cognitive decline. If you have something concrete, a concrete objective test, that can sometimes go a really long way for people to be able to see that, oh, okay, so I am having some memory issues, I am having some problems with this. But if you can also kind of go at it with them, like, this is a journey we're going to take together. I'm having some memory concerns too. Let's talk about this. What are some things you think we can do to kind of improve our memory? So it's a really, really tough area, that sort of gray area, in between where people are having issues and they're really in denial. But the biggest thing is you can't force them, you can't push them, and you can't make them feel like there's something wrong with them, or that they're broken, and because they're not. They just, need to be able to get some help somewhere. And so sometimes you really just kind of have to lead them and almost make them, think that it's their idea, right? Again, create that illusion of control and make them think that it's their idea to be able to seek help.
Lindsay, that's a great idea, and I again agree that those are tough patients, and that is one of the toughest times of the illness. Unfortunately, the illness is going to get worse. It will get easier from that perspective. It just means things are progressing. But Lindsay, again, so much fantastic information, so useful and so practical. So folks, Lindsay's contact information is there. We really appreciate you being with us. I hope that you will save the date. I'm sorry, I forgot to check the date. October 12th is our next presentation. We will be hosting Mia Martino from the Division of Senior Services. She's head of the Ombudsman program, learning how to navigate some of the challenges of taking care of someone who lives in long-term care. So I hope that you all will join us for that. Again, Lindsay, we thank you. On behalf of Daybreak, I'm happy that we were able to sponsor the presentation, and hope that you'll give us a call if you have any questions about our services. With that, I wish you all a beautiful afternoon. Get outside and enjoy some sunshine, and we'll see you next month. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Lindsay.